The Epstein files are real, not a Netflix special, not a conspiracy theory, real. And yet, half the people watching this will scroll right past the truth because it's uncomfortable, will dissect alien sightings, football stats, and which influencer cheated this week. But when actual predators with political power get exposed, everyone suddenly finds something else to watch. Why? Because facing evil means admitting how complicit we've been in silence. Meanwhile, there's one woman who refused to stay silent, a woman who didn't have billions, connections, or even safety, and still said, "No, you don't get to erase me." That woman was Virginia Roberts Giuffre. So, before you go back to pretending you care about truth, ask yourself this. If she could risk everything to expose one of the most powerful sex trafficking rings on the planet, what's your excuse for doing nothing about the monsters in plain sight? This isn't a feel-good story. It's a punch to the throat of collective apathy. This is nobody's girl. Let's begin. Disclaimer. This video falls under the Fair Use Act. It's for educational and transformative purposes. We are not reproducing the book. We're recontextualizing it, examining, critiquing, and calling out the systems and mindsets that made this story possible. Now, let's talk about the book and the woman behind it. Virginia Roberts Giuffre, a name the media either glorified or tried to bury depending on the day. She was the face of the Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell case, the girl in that infamous photo, the one everyone debated but few actually listened to. Nobody's Girl is her memoir, part confession, part indictment, part battle cry. It's not a trauma story told for pity. It's a survivor's manual for how to turn hell into a courtroom and reclaim your voice when the world calls you crazy. She grew up in chaos, parental neglect, abuse, homelessness, trafficking. Her life could have been another statistic filed under unfortunate background, but instead, she forced her trauma into the spotlight of history. She named names, she dragged the darkness into daylight, and for that, she paid the kind of price no one with a Netflix subscription can comprehend. And yet, here's where it hits. The system didn't just fail her, we did. Society failed her when we bought the billionaire myth, when we shrugged and said, "That's too dark for me," when we made memes instead of movements. This book is a mirror, not of celebrity scandal, but of collective cowardice. It's Virginia saying, you might not have been Epstein's victim, but you sure as hell live in his world. That's why this story matters. It's not about voyeurism, it's about accountability. It's a roadmap from silence to defiance, from being someone's prey to being nobody's girl. Welcome to Mindful Reads Hub. Let's get started. The ghost of girlhood, a child made of bruises and hope. She was born into noise, not the kind that fills a room, the kind that eats it. Arguments behind thin walls, slamming doors, adults whose pain leaks into their children's bones. That's the atmosphere where Virginia Giuffre learned what love looked like. Conditional, distracted, unreliable. Before the jets, before the courtrooms, before her name became a search term, she was a little girl in a Florida house trying to decode why the people who were supposed to protect her kept disappearing. Every survivor story starts like this, not with the monster, but with the silence that lets monsters grow. In Nobody's Girl, she writes about the early years as if she's watching a movie she can't stop. Her father comes and goes like a rumor. Her mother works, drinks, cries, repeats. There's no villain in sight yet, only the casual neglect of adults who are too busy surviving their own chaos to notice what it's doing to her. It's a slow-motion tutorial in invisibility. Psychologists call this attachment injury. I call it social amnesia. It's the thing that happens when an entire culture normalizes absence. America is full of these quiet fractures. 43% of US children now grow up in single-parent households, the highest rate in the developed world. Inflation still chews through paychecks. 1 in 4 parents skips meals so their kids can eat. Everyone's tired, broke, overworked, and in that exhaustion, neglect starts to look like necessity. We don't mean to ignore the warning signs. We just run out of bandwidth to care. That's the soil Virginia's childhood grew in. She wasn't born into privilege or rebellion. She was born into indifference. She writes about moving from place to place, watching adults implode, trying to hold together some version of normal. There's a line that echoes beneath the pages. The idea that if she could just be good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, someone might finally see her. That's the kind of belief predators smell from miles away. And here's where reality slaps us across the face. Grooming doesn't start when the abuser shows up. It starts the first time a child learns their safety is negotiable. By the time a man like Jeffrey Epstein enters her story, the groundwork has already been laid by people who were supposed to love her. But this isn't a tragedy about one family. It's a reflection of us. We've built a society where attention is currency and empathy is debt. Children compete with screens, algorithms, and collapsing economies for eye contact. When the government releases new numbers showing over 350,000 kids in foster care and another 60,000 labeled runaway, nobody blinks. We call them statistics until they end up in documentaries. The brilliance of Giuffre's early storytelling is that she doesn't sensationalize it. She just shows the grind of surviving neglect, the ordinary details, a bed that's too cold, a meal that doesn't come, an adult who looks through you instead of at you. It's quiet horror, the kind that doesn't make the news because it's too familiar, and that's what makes it powerful. Because if her story feels normal, then the problem isn't rare. It's cultural rot wearing middle-class perfume. Here's the uncomfortable commentary. We celebrate resilience while manufacturing the trauma that makes it necessary. We tell kids to be strong, but strength is just endurance in nicer clothes. Virginia's childhood is proof that resilience isn't a compliment. It's an autopsy report written by people who failed you. And yet, buried under all that chaos, there's defiance. She finds tiny ways to rebel, laughter that survives the shouting, curiosity that refuses to die. That's the ember that later becomes a fire. The girl who once disappeared learns to study the darkness. She notices who gets protected and who doesn't. That awareness becomes her weapon. By the time she's a teenager, the damage is already coded into her nervous system. She's conditioned to accept instability, to confuse control for care, to believe that attention, any attention, is love. And in a world where billionaires buy privacy and politicians buy silence, that belief is lethal. This isn't just Virginia's biography, it's a mirror. It's every ignored report, she's probably exaggerating, every time society sides with comfort over confrontation. The early part of her life shows that the pipeline to exploitation isn't built overnight. It's assembled from 1,000 shrugged shoulders. The most haunting part? She never asks for pity. She tells the truth, plain and cold, and dares you to do something with it. Because once you understand how ordinary her beginning was, you can't hide behind ignorance anymore. You have to admit that evil doesn't look like a monster. It looks like apathy. Key idea: neglect is not an accident. It's the breeding ground for every abuse of power that follows. Favorite quote: "When they didn't see me, I learned to see everything." Key takeaway: the story doesn't begin with villains, it begins with absence. And until we face how comfortable we've become with looking away, the cycle will keep restarting in someone else's living room. The disappearing daughter, when love turns its face away. The thing about running away is that you never really leave. You just change the scenery of your pain. Virginia learned that early. When love turns its face away, the only thing left to hold onto is the echo. She goes from room to room, house to house, convinced that somewhere, someone will keep their promise. But promises in her world were like coupons, expired before you could use them. In her teenage years, the chaos of her home bleeds into everything. She's no longer a child, but not yet a person, floating between neglect and necessity. Her mother is half present, her father distant, the world indifferent. She's trying to be wanted in a place that keeps teaching her she's replaceable. And this isn't just one girl's story, it's America's open secret. Because while we like to plaster family values on bumper stickers, the truth is we've industrialized abandonment. In 2025, the US child welfare system is more overcrowded than ever. Over 400,000 kids in foster care, most shuffled from one temporary fix to another. More than half will never return to stable homes. These are the invisible children, trained from birth to survive on crumbs of affection. We call it resilience, they call it Tuesday. And this is exactly the emotional economy that predators invest in, supply chains of forgotten kids whose boundaries have already been eroded by the people who were supposed to build them. Giuffre writes about her teenage years like a slow slide. She doesn't fall, she's pulled. One bad decision becomes a lifeline. A stranger's attention becomes a drug. It's the kind of vulnerability that doesn't look like weakness. It looks like hope. She dreams of horses, of escape, of freedom, but every wish comes with strings. When you grow up hearing you're less than nothing, you start to accept any version of something, even if it hurts. And here's the punch in the throat. Exploitation rarely looks like evil. It looks like opportunity. Someone offers a job, a place to stay, a ride, a compliment, all dressed in normalcy. That's how trafficking thrives in broad daylight. It's not a white van on a dark street. It's the charismatic adult who understands you better than your parents ever did. The same pattern plays out again and again, and we keep missing it because we'd rather believe monsters are strangers than neighbors. In one of the most revealing parts of her memoir, Virginia describes trying to hold on to her sanity by imagining control. Through horses, through movement, through anything that let her pretend she was steering. That's the psychological paradox of abuse. Even when you're trapped, you create tiny rituals of autonomy. It's survival masquerading as choice, but it's also how trauma rewires ambition. She doesn't just want freedom, she wants proof she deserves it. If this sounds dark, it should, because it's not just history, it's happening right now. Reports released this year show that online grooming cases in the US have surged by over 80% since 2020. Social media has become the new recruitment ground. Predators don't need an island anymore, they just need Wi-Fi. And when the headlines about Epstein, Maxwell, or anyone else fade, the machinery keeps running because the supply of vulnerable kids never runs out. Virginia's story in this stretch isn't about crime yet, it's about conditioning. The subtle, invisible education that teaches young girls to equate suffering with worth. She's not asking why no one saves her. She's wondering if she's worth saving. That's what happens when a child learns neglect so deeply it becomes identity. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. It should. Because somewhere out there, another kid is living this exact paragraph right now while you scroll past. There's a brutal beauty in how she writes it. Not poetic, not polished, honest. The kind of honesty that doesn't beg for sympathy. It demands accountability. And it's not just for the predators, it's for us. Because if we can watch a generation of kids disappear into systems, screens, and billionaires' playgrounds without asking how they got there, then we're accomplices in the silence. The education in these pages is simple. The worst betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who teach you to expect nothing, and then call that normal. That's what breaks people long before abuse does. Not the act itself, but the prelude. The years of being unseen that make the act possible. The economy might fluctuate, politicians might promise reform, but until society starts measuring success by how it treats its most invisible members, stories like Virginia's will keep repeating. We'll keep producing daughters who disappear before they ever have a chance to speak. Key idea: when love withdraws, neglect doesn't end, it metastasizes. It becomes the language predators use to introduce themselves. Favorite quote: if you're told you're nothing long enough, you start negotiating with the lie. Key takeaway: abandonment isn't just emotional, it's systemic. The people who should protect us often create the silence that sells us. Virginia's story here isn't about helplessness, it's a warning that every ignored cry is an invitation for corruption to enter, and until we stop pretending not to hear, it's not going away. The pink house, where innocence was sold. She thought she'd finally escaped. A new town, new faces, maybe a clean start, but trauma doesn't need directions, it knows how to find you. When Virginia ended up working near Palm Beach, she didn't walk into danger. Danger was already waiting, wearing linen and a smile. The walls were pastel, the air smelled expensive, and everyone called it opportunity. That's how evil packages itself in America: sunlight, good manners, and a house too perfect to question. She was a teenager, still dizzy from a home that had taught her to equate attention with safety. So when someone like Glenn Maxwell showed up, cultured and charming, promising mentorship and adventure, Virginia didn't see a predator. She saw a lifeline. Maxwell's world glimmered with privilege: private jets, art collections, famous friends, and that illusion of belonging is what traps you faster than any lock. She wanted to believe that kindness was finally real, that rich people couldn't possibly be monsters because monsters aren't supposed to look like royalty. But the so-called pink house was a factory, and the product was innocence. Epstein's estate operated like a business: recruit, groom, reward, repeat. The book captures that surreal blend of opulence and horror, massages that turned into violations, money used like duct tape to seal every wound. Virginia describes it plainly: no melodrama, just a disassociation of a girl performing adulthood because no one ever gave her a childhood. That's where the education begins, how power hides behind politeness. In 2025, new releases from the Epstein files confirmed what survivors had said for years. CEOs, professors, foreign leaders, all intertwined with the same quiet logistics of exploitation. And you have to ask yourself, how many people had to look away for this to last decades? How many assistants booked flights? How many bankers moved the cash? How many neighbors heard something and decided it was none of my business? This isn't just her story, it's the architecture of capitalism's darkest corner. The illusion that success cleanses sin. We forgive billionaires faster than we forgive truth tellers. We say, well, they donated to charity. We ignore the receipts. It's the same mindset that lets abuse flourish in boardrooms, churches, and celebrity mansions. When money becomes morality, humanity becomes collateral. What makes Virginia's recollection so sharp is that she doesn't just expose the predators, she exposes the ecosystem that fed them. Every compliment, every designer gift, every silent witness forms part of the trap. She wasn't kidnapped, she was conditioned. And the scariest part? That conditioning still exists today, on social media, in influencer culture, in every teenager chasing validation from people who see them as profit. Think about it. The US economy is slowing again, wages are stagnant, and yet trafficking profits are at an all-time high, over $150 billion globally, according to the UN. That's not coincidence, that's supply and demand. The poorer people get, the cheaper innocence becomes, and you can't pretend you're uninvolved when you buy into the same system that rewards exploitation at scale. Virginia's years inside that mansion read like a fever dream. One part privilege, one part prison. She flew on jets with powerful men, stayed in hotels most people only see on postcards, but it was all camouflage for captivity. That contrast is the point. Abuse doesn't live in the shadows anymore. It lives in the light, where nobody thinks to look. Here's where the confrontation hits. If you'd met her back then, would you have believed her? Or would you, like most of society, have decided she was too messy, too inconsistent, too attention-seeking? We still do it every day. We weaponize respectability against survivors, demanding they behave perfectly while we excuse predators for complexity. That's how the pink houses of the world stay open for business. Virginia's recollection forces you to face that hypocrisy. She doesn't just describe events, she builds a mirror and dares you to look. The luxury, the silence, the complicity, it's not ancient history. It's now, just rebranded with hashtags and PR firms. Key idea. The greatest trick power ever pulled was convincing the world that exploitation looks glamorous. Favorite quote, "They said I was lucky. Lucky girls don't cry themselves to sleep." Key takeaway. The story of the mansion isn't about one man's depravity. It's about a culture that mistakes wealth for virtue and obedience for consent. Virginia's voice turns that illusion inside out. And if you're still comfortable after hearing it, you weren't listening. The pyramid scheme. The men who built their thrones on girls. It always starts the same way, with a man who's too powerful to be questioned and too polite to look guilty. They called him a philanthropist, a financier, a man who knew people. Funny how money turns predators into mysteries. Epstein wasn't some Bond villain operating in the shadows. He was a product of the system, a salesman who understood that the real business of power isn't innovation or intellect, it's access. And the product? Girls like Virginia, repackaged as opportunity. Inside the book, you feel that machinery grinding. The jets, the mansions, the casual name dropping of world leaders. It's the pyramid built perfectly. At the top, the few who take. In the middle, the enablers who pretend they don't know. And at the bottom, the bodies that make the luxury possible. That's not just Epstein's world, that's our economy in miniature. Think about what's happening in America right now. Billionaires are flying to climate summits in private jets while people can't afford rent. Tech companies are laying off thousands while CEOs cash bonuses for efficiency. It's the same moral math that justified what happened in those mansions. The idea that power entitles you to everything and the powerless should be grateful for crumbs. Virginia's experience with Epstein wasn't random. It was systemic. She was trained to smile, to obey, to perform gratitude for survival. The way she describes the hierarchy of girls, the rotation of flights, the illusion of luxury, it's chilling because it mirrors every institution that feeds on compliance. She talks about being sent to please men, described as important. No names at first, just titles. The same way corporations talk about partners or clients. Language becomes the disguise for evil. And here's where the commentary hits. We've all become fluent in that language. We excuse exploitation with words like networking, mentorship, opportunity. We're taught to admire billionaires, to defend them like sports teams. Even when their success is built on suffering, we choose not to see. Epstein didn't invent corruption. He branded it. He turned human lives into collateral for credibility, and everyone with a title bought a ticket. You want to know what power really looks like? It's a man whose crimes are known for decades, but who keeps his social calendar full of politicians, professors, and princes. It's flight logs sealed, investigations stalled, and survivors discredited because truth is bad for business. The same banks that froze small business loans during the pandemic wired millions for Epstein's projects. Nobody batted an eye. When Virginia describes the very important man in her story, you can feel the disgust under the politeness. The suits, the mansions, the photo ops, all a facade. She wasn't meeting men, she was meeting masks. Men who wore their status like armor and treated silence as a currency. And what's more grotesque is that most of them still walk free, giving speeches about leadership and integrity. Here's the ugly mirror. The pyramid doesn't collapse because of exposure. It collapses when people stop holding it up. The enablers, the silent assistants, the bystanders. That's where real accountability lives. You don't need to be a billionaire to participate in exploitation. Every time we glorify wealth without asking where it came from, we become part of that same structure. There's a line between ambition and apathy, and most of society has forgotten where it is. Virginia's story forces you to see what that apathy costs. It's not just her, it's an entire generation taught that success excuses anything. Politicians sell family values while attending fundraisers hosted by men later indicted for trafficking. News anchors debate cancel culture instead of culture's cancer. That's how predators win. They hide behind our distractions. The book doesn't linger on revenge, it lingers on recognition. When she sees herself as part of the bottom of the pyramid, it's not self-pity, it's analysis. It's understanding that the same system that protects billionaires is the one that punishes survivors for not staying silent. That's why this story is educational. It's a roadmap of how power corrupts morality, one compromise at a time. Key idea: power doesn't corrupt absolutely, indifference does. Favorite quote: "They said he was too important to fail. I learned that meant I was too small to matter." Key takeaway: the pyramid doesn't stand because of monsters at the top. It stands because ordinary people hold it up, afraid to lose comfort by demanding truth. Epstein's empire wasn't unique. It was just honest about how the world really works. And until we stop mistaking privilege for innocence, we'll keep rebuilding that same pyramid, one silent compromise at a time. Strings attached, the price of obedience. There's a moment every puppet has to face. When you realize the strings aren't made of rope, they're made of fear. The kind that tightens every time you try to move. That's the invisible leash Virginia describes. Not the handcuffs or the locked doors, but the mind games. The way control wears a smile and says, "It's for your own good." Control never starts loud. It starts quiet. A small favor, a little manipulation, a gentle reminder of who holds the power. In her world, every gift had a price tag, and the currency was obedience. The designer clothes, the trips, the fake kindness, they weren't luxury, they were leverage. It's no different from how corporate America keeps its workers in line today, promise them opportunity, dangle a promotion, and call it loyalty while cutting health insurance on the side. The powerful always disguise chains as choices. Virginia's story of life with the so-called other man exposes a truth most people would rather ignore. Abuse doesn't always look violent. It often looks organized. Grooming isn't about physical force, it's psychological warfare disguised as affection. When someone rewires your idea of love to mean compliance, you stop fighting because you start believing obedience is safety. That's the real tragedy. You don't just lose your freedom, you lose the ability to recognize it. And that's not just a survivor's experience, that's society in 2025 America. Look around, inflation's up. Wages are stagnant, billionaires double their fortunes while the average person debates whether they can afford groceries. We're being groomed by systems too, told that debt is normal, burnout is ambition, and silence is professionalism. The same mental playbook used by abusers is used by the institutions we trust. Keep them exhausted, keep them afraid to speak, reward them with crumbs so they call it privilege. The book paints these moments vividly. Virginia describes learning to smile through disgust, to perform obedience to survive. Every yes she gave was another string tied tighter. That's the psychology of captivity. Convince the victim that rebellion is selfish. That's what predators do best. They turn survival into shame. But there's something deeper under the surface. You realize this isn't just one woman's trauma. It's a metaphor for every person who's been taught to stay small, to stay safe. Every woman told not to make a scene. Every worker told to be grateful to have a job. Every citizen told to trust the powerful because they know better. It's the same pyramid from before, just in a different costume. And here's the uncomfortable part. Some of the people who kept Virginia trapped weren't monsters. They were regular people doing their jobs. Drivers, assistants, secretaries, security guards. They saw enough to know, but not enough courage to stop it. That's the same moral blindness that keeps corruption alive today. Everyone says they do the right thing until the right thing threatens their paycheck. This is where the story becomes confrontation, not confession. The strings aren't just literal, they're cultural. We all play our part in systems of silence. The media sanitizes abuse if the abuser wears a suit. Corporations sponsor women's empowerment panels while settling harassment lawsuits quietly. Politicians sell virtue while vacationing with donors on private islands. It's the same theatre, over and over. Virginia's realization that her worth was defined by others mirrors how society measures everyone now. Likes, followers, brand deals, job titles, all modern strings. They pull you until you forget what it feels like to stand on your own. That's why her defiance later hits harder. Cutting those strings means more than escaping an abuser. It means unlearning the illusion that control equals safety. There's a scene in her narrative where she starts to notice the cracks, the way the promises stop matching the reality, the way loyalty feels like a sentence. That's the bridge too far. The moment where silence stops being protection and starts being participation, and that's the moment every society reaches eventually, when the illusion collapses under its own weight, when the workers walk out, when the voters stop buying slogans, when the survivors tell their stories and refuse to be shamed for it. Key idea, real freedom begins the second obedience stops feeling noble. Favorite quote, "They told me I was lucky to be chosen. I didn't know luck could feel like a cage." Key takeaway, the world trains us to obey long before it asks us to question. Virginia's story isn't just about surviving Epstein's web. It's about cutting through every string that keeps people quiet, compliant, and complicit. Because the truth is, the system doesn't need monsters to survive. It only needs people too afraid to cut the strings. The land of smiles, running toward freedom, dragging ghosts. Sometimes you run halfway across the world thinking distance can drown ghosts, only to find they packed themselves in your suitcase. Thailand was supposed to be paradise, the land of smiles, they call it. But for Virginia, the smiles looked suspiciously like masks. Every palm tree and turquoise horizon was an invitation to start over, but trauma doesn't read travel brochures. You don't just move on, you migrate with your memories. She tried. She really did. New husband, new passport, new hope. And for a moment, you want to believe the world rewards survivors for enduring. But the truth is, the world loves redemption stories only when they're tidy. No one wants to see the relapse, the nightmares, the hypervigilance that makes you scan every crowd for a familiar face. Healing isn't cinematic. It's slow, repetitive, and maddeningly ordinary. In the book, she describes this phase as a strange calm after the chaos, where love becomes both medicine and minefield. That's what trauma does. It distorts normal. You crave safety, but can't trust it when it shows up. Her new life was technically free, but mentally, she was still on the leash of memory, proof that geography can't cure psychology. And that's a mirror of today's culture. America's chasing its own version of escape, digital detoxes, mindfulness apps, quiet luxury. We rename avoidance self-care and wonder why the anxiety never leaves. Healing isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about dragging it into the light so it stops controlling you. But that's uncomfortable, and comfort is our new religion. By now, 2025 headlines are flooded with resilience porn, stories that sell survival like a lifestyle brand. We applaud victims who forgive quickly, who smile on cue, who make trauma palatable for morning television. But that's not strength, That's performance. True recovery looks like Virginia's messy persistence, reliving the past without letting it rewrite the future. When she describes fighting back against bullies, literal and figurative, you feel that shift. The bullied girl who once shrank now starts defending others. There's something raw about that. The realization that empowerment isn't a TED talk, it's an instinct. She stops waiting for justice from the same institutions that failed her and starts creating it in her own small ways. That's a warning shot to all of us. If you think justice is something you can outsource, you're already part of the problem. The honeymoon part of her story is painfully ironic. Love becomes an experiment in trust. Can someone who's been used learn to believe in tenderness? Can she stop expecting betrayal like it's a holiday tradition? The real victory isn't the marriage or the escape, it's choosing vulnerability again when you have every reason not to. That's what survival actually looks like. Meanwhile, look at America right now. Record numbers of women reporting workplace harassment, yet settlements hush them into silence. Survivors being sued for defamation by the men they accused. It's the same cycle, power rewriting the narrative until the victims look inconvenient. Virginia's exile may have been across oceans, but millions live their own exiles right at home, trapped between fear and the pretense of moving on. So when she walks through the markets of Bangkok, blending in among tourists and locals, it's not freedom she's chasing, it's anonymity. That quiet moment when no one knows your story and you can breathe without being defined by it. But even that peace comes with guilt. Because survival always costs something, innocence, identity, or in her case, the illusion that justice will fix everything. Key idea, you can change your scenery, but not your wiring until you face what built it. Favorite quote, sometimes running away is the bravest way of staying alive. Key takeaway, healing isn't a postcard from paradise. It's a borderless, brutal process of reclaiming yourself. The world might forgive abusers faster than it listens to survivors, but freedom begins when you stop waiting for permission to heal. Virginia didn't escape to forget. She escaped to remember on her own terms. And that's the kind of rebellion every survivor deserves. Sunshine and shadows, trying to build a life after the storm. There's a strange kind of hope that comes after hell, the kind that whispers, maybe this time I can build something real. That's where Virginia finds herself now. A new country, a family growing, sunlight pouring through the cracks of everything she thought she'd lost. But make no mistake, even sunshine can burn when you've spent years in the dark. Her life in Australia reads almost like a redemption story on paper. A husband who loves her, children who give her a reason to wake up, a life that doesn't involve flight logs and billionaire phone calls, but healing doesn't follow a script. The ghosts don't politely leave when you start a family, they learn your new address. Every lullaby becomes a negotiation with memory. Every smile hides a calculation. What if my past finds them too? That's the hidden cost of survival nobody talks about. You don't just rebuild a life, you rebuild yourself around the damage. She's trying to be a mother while unlearning what power used to mean, trying to give her kids the safety she never had while fighting the fear that safety is a lie. That's what trauma does. It makes you parent like a soldier, always scanning for danger, even in peace. And it's not just her. Look around. We live in a country addicted to survival, not healing. We celebrate grind culture like it's noble, applaud exhaustion, romanticize anxiety. Everyone's overworked, underpaid, and told to be grateful. That's what survival looks like on a national scale, a society that keeps patching wounds instead of preventing them. We're all parenting our futures while pretending the past doesn't matter. Virginia's everyday moments, the ones the tabloids never care about, are the real revolution. Making breakfast, laughing at her kids' jokes, choosing love even though her brain screams it's dangerous. That's heroism, not the kind with applause, but the kind that requires endurance. because healing after being used isn't glamorous. It's choosing to stay when everything in you wants to run. But there's another layer here, the paranoia that never leaves. Every news headline about Epstein's circle, every whisper about new files being unsealed becomes a reminder that monsters don't always die. Sometimes they rebrand. They move from courtrooms to boardrooms, from scandals to comebacks. America loves a redemption arc, even for predators. And that's the sickness. We forgive men who built empires on silence, but still side-eye women for speaking up. The book's domestic calm has this underlying hum of tension. Like she knows peace isn't permanent, it's rented. That's what makes her story resonate now. In a time when the US is reeling from economic anxiety, political chaos, and moral fatigue, we're all trying to build a home on shifting ground. Her small victories, a stable job, a baby's laugh, a day without flashbacks, feel like rebellion against a world that profits from chaos. Here's the truth nobody wants to face. Starting over doesn't erase your past, it just gives you new reasons to confront it. The more she builds, the more the ghosts test the walls. That's how healing works. It's construction under constant sabotage. And if that doesn't describe America right now, I don't know what does. Virginia's defiance lies not in lawsuits or headlines, but in something quieter, staying. That's the rebellion. That's the difference between being a survivor and becoming a teacher. Her kids don't grow up under the shadow of silence. They grow up under the light of truth. She made sure of that, because once you've seen the world's rot up close, your only choice is to raise something better. Key idea. True recovery isn't rebuilding what was lost, it's building what should have existed in the first place. Favorite quote, "For the first time, I wasn't running from something. I was running towards someone, myself." Key takeaway, you don't heal by erasing the past, you heal by giving it context and refusing to repeat it. Virginia's new life isn't a fairy tale. It's proof that happiness can grow in contaminated soil if you keep tending it. And that's the message we all need right now. Stop waiting for the world to be safe before you start living. The Princess and the Prison, the illusion of a happy ending. There's a point in every survivor's story when the world decides it's time for them to move on. When the cameras click, the lights go up, and the public starts cheering for a happy ending, whether it's real or not. That's where Virginia found herself. The tabloids called her the brave mother, the fighter, the woman who beat the odds. But the truth? She was still bleeding, just not where anyone could see it. People love a comeback as long as it doesn't make them uncomfortable. They want to see scars, not stitches. They want the survivor smiling on morning TV, not the woman who wakes up at 3 a.m. replaying the sound of her own silence. That's the trap of public redemption. It becomes a new kind of prison. You're no longer a person, you're a symbol that's supposed to behave. In her story, the new chapter of motherhood and public life collides with that illusion. On the surface, things looked perfect. Kids, sunlight, laughter. But every smile cost energy most people never see. Behind every family photo, there's a woman checking the locks twice, flinching at sudden noises, wondering if safety is just another illusion built on PR and good lighting. That's the part of healing the world still doesn't get. You can't Photoshop trauma. You can dress it up in a press release, but it still sleeps beside you. And maybe that's the biggest lie society sells right now, that success erases suffering. Look at America in 2025. Record depression, a collapsing mental health system, but Instagram feeds still full of good vibes only. We've turned denial into a lifestyle brand. Virginia's world mirrors that hypocrisy perfectly. Even after exposing one of the biggest sex trafficking networks in modern history, the world still treated her like a character in someone else's plotline. The powerful men who enabled her abuse get sympathy editorials and second acts. She gets dissected by headlines that pretend objectivity while sniffing for scandal. That's how patriarchy works. It forgives its own faster than it believes its victims. The scenes where she reflects on her daughter, her very own princess, hit hard. Because it's not just motherhood, it's reclamation. Raising a girl when you've been treated like property turns love into activism. Every bedtime story becomes a declaration. You will never live what I lived, but even that promise is heavy. She can protect her child from predators, but not from a culture that still worships them. That's the unbearable truth. The fight doesn't end with survival. It evolves. There's a line between empowerment and performance, and most people don't see it until they cross it. The world keeps asking women like her to be strong, not realizing that constant strength is its own form of exhaustion. You don't heal by pretending you're invincible. You heal by admitting you're still fragile. Yet fragility doesn't sell books or interviews, and that's the real con of celebrity survival stories. We don't want truth. We want palatable pain. This section of her story feels like a mirror held up to all of us, especially now when headlines about unsealed Epstein files make the news cycle for a day and then vanish under sports scores. Justice has an attention span problem. We care for 36 hours and then it's back to TikTok therapy and fast fashion feminism. Meanwhile, the same power structures stay untouched, rebranding predators as controversial geniuses and survivors as unstable. What makes Virginia's story subversive is that she refuses to play along. She doesn't give the neat closure arc. She admits that happiness is complicated, that family doesn't erase fear, that trauma sometimes whispers when it should be silent, and that's what makes it real. The illusion of the happy ending isn't her victory, it's her rebellion against it. Because survival isn't cinematic, it's administrative, it's paperwork, panic attacks, and parenting through the noise. Key idea: the world doesn't want your truth, it wants your transformation story. Real freedom is choosing to be human instead of perfect. Favorite quote: they wanted the fairy tale, but I only had the truth, and that was never enough for them. Key takeaway: healing isn't linear, public, or pretty. It's messy, continuous, and deeply personal. The so-called happy ending isn't the end at all. It's the first honest chapter after years of surviving the script written by someone else. Virginia's defiance lies in refusing to perform forgiveness for the comfort of the crowd. And maybe that's the most revolutionary act of all. The Sunshine State of Denial, facing what the world ignored. Coming home is supposed to mean safety. That's the lie we've all been sold, that geography can fix trauma, that distance can dilute memory. But when Virginia came back to the Sunshine State, she wasn't returning home. She was walking into a crime scene that never got cleaned up. Everything looked the same. The palm trees, the neon diners, the fake politeness, but under the gloss, it still smelled like complicity. It always does when a place learns to smile over its secrets. And that's the thing about denial. It's an industry in America. You can trademark it, package it, and sell it with a slogan like, everything's fine. The Sunshine State has mastered it. Behind every gated community and freshly painted condo is a silent agreement. We don't talk about what happened here. The beaches wash away footprints, but not what they lead to. Virginia's story throws that hypocrisy into the light, the way people pretend that trauma evaporates just because you cross a state line or sign a new lease. But the ghosts followed her. They always do, because trauma isn't a location, it's an echo. And when the past refuses to die, the world calls it obsession, not justice. That's what happens to survivors when they stop being victims. The system gaslights them into silence all over again. And what's most confronting is that it's not just her story. It's an American one. Look around. The same headlines play out like reruns. Unsealed Epstein documents, CEOs resigning quietly before court dates, private islands that suddenly become real estate listings. The powerful always seem to land on their feet, while the victims are told to heal privately. It's absurd. We ask women to survive public abuse but process it in private. Then we wonder why they explode. When Virginia came forward again, when she started speaking out after years of enforced quiet, the backlash wasn't subtle. The whispers, the legal threats, the concerned friends warning her to stay quiet, it's the same choreography used against every woman who exposes a man with power. America doesn't burn witches anymore, it sues them. But what makes this part of her story so cutting is her clarity. She's not looking for pity. She's naming the rot, the connections, the cover-ups, the convenient amnesia that happens when money rewrites morality. When she describes the so-called important men who built their lives on the pain of girls like her, it's not sensationalism, it's forensic memory. She's documenting the machinery of exploitation, and that's what makes people uncomfortable. Because she's not supposed to remember in detail, survivors are supposed to be vague. It's easier to forgive shadows than faces. There's also something almost prophetic about the timing. While the book's story unfolds, the real world mirrors it. The Epstein-Maxwell fallout, the unmasking of politicians and financiers with ties to that world. And yet, every time new evidence surfaces, the internet treats it like gossip instead of a reckoning. That's the price of collective denial, outrage without action. We've become spectators to our own moral decay. Virginia's confrontation with her past and with the people who built careers on burying it isn't just personal revenge, it's rebellion. It's what happens when silence stops being an option. She exposes the uncomfortable reality that systems don't fix themselves. They double down until someone risks everything to stop them. And that's the point of no return. Not when you leave the past behind, but when you refuse to let it repeat itself. What's haunting about this part of her journey is the tension between exposure and exhaustion. Speaking truth feels righteous for 5 minutes, then it costs you sleep, sanity, and sometimes your safety. You can hear that exhaustion between the lines, the ache of someone who knows that justice isn't just delayed, it's rigged. But she keeps going, not because she expects the world to change, but because not speaking would mean dying quietly. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Society still rewards the quiet ones. The ones who smile and say, "I'm over it." The ones who make their pain convenient for others. But Virginia's story refuses convenience. It's messy, it's public, and it's necessary. She forces the reader and the country to look at what we'd rather scroll past. Maybe that's why this part of the story feels so electric, because it isn't just a woman confronting her abusers, it's a nation confronting its reflection, and it's ugly. The Sunshine State becomes a metaphor for all of America, bright, beautiful, and willfully blind. Key idea, you can't heal in the same place that protected your abuser. Returning home isn't closure, it's confrontation. Favorite quote, "They wanted me to come home quietly, but home was the first place that taught me silence." Key takeaway, justice isn't just a courtroom. It's a refusal to pretend anymore. When the world wants you to forget, remembering becomes an act of rebellion. Denial might keep the peace, but truth is what keeps you alive. Breaking the chain, the mother, the oath, the reckoning. It's funny how people romanticize motherhood, like it's some ethereal redemption arc. You have a baby, and suddenly the world expects your trauma to turn into wisdom, your fear into patience, your scars into poetry. But the truth is much grittier. Motherhood doesn't fix you, it exposes you. It drags your ghost out of the shadows and forces you to decide if you're going to pass them on or finally set them on fire. Virginia's journey at this point isn't about survival anymore. It's about protection. And that's where it gets powerful, because it's one thing to survive for yourself, but another to fight for a child. When she holds her daughter, she's holding every version of herself that no one ever protected. That's the reckoning. The real one. Not the courtroom kind, but the quiet, relentless choice to break the cycle. And breaking a generational curse isn't some Instagram quote. It's messy. It's waking up at 3 a.m., terrified you'll become the person who hurt you. It's realizing that love is a skill, not an instinct. The book captures this tension, the tenderness of motherhood laced with the sharp edge of vigilance. She's not just a mom, she's a soldier disguised as one. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. The world doesn't actually support women who break cycles. We glorify the strong single mom archetype while ignoring how much she has to sacrifice just to stay standing. We cheer for resilience because it's easier than building systems that prevent the need for it. And that's where Virginia's story cuts deepest. She didn't choose strength, it was forced on her. Just like it's forced on millions of women every day in a world that still measures their worth by endurance, not peace. Her oath, "I will protect my daughter no matter what," isn't just a maternal promise, it's political rebellion. Because protecting your child means rejecting the silence that let you be hurt. It means teaching your daughter that her voice isn't just allowed, it's sacred. It means refusing to participate in the culture of obedience that made monsters untouchable. And here's where the commentary meets the present. The Epstein case isn't history, it's a mirror. Every few months, new court documents leak, another name drops, and the public does what it always does. Scrolls, debates, forgets. It's collective amnesia dressed as outrage. But what's the point of exposing predators if the systems that protect them stay untouched? Virginia's fight, both in the book and in real life, forces that question into the light. We live in a country that calls itself the land of the free, but freedom without accountability is just chaos with branding. Virginia's story exposes that contradiction. Her reckoning isn't just about personal justice, it's about dismantling the idea that power should come with immunity. When she stands her ground, she's not just defending her daughter, she's calling out the entire machine that let her own childhood be sold to the highest bidder. It's a brutal but necessary truth. The same hands that built the systems of wealth, politics, and influence are often the ones that exploited the powerless to do it. The Epstein case is proof. The women who spoke up didn't just challenge individual men, they challenged an economy of silence. Virginia's book, especially in this part, drives that home. Healing isn't forgiveness, it's accountability. And accountability, by the way, is not polite. It doesn't come with soft music and therapy quotes. It's loud, disruptive, and often met with legal threats and character assassinations. You can almost hear that defiance between the lines. She's done apologizing for surviving, done softening her edges so people feel comfortable with her story. That's what breaking the chain really means. Choosing honesty over acceptance, truth over image, her daughter's future over her own comfort. The most haunting part, she understands the cost. Breaking a cycle doesn't come free. It comes with isolation, because when you outgrow your trauma, you outgrow the people who benefited from your silence. And that's something no one warns you about when they tell you to heal. But there's beauty in that exile, the kind that's earned, not given. By the end of this part of her story, she isn't just surviving her past, she's rewriting it for her child. That's not weakness, that's power in its rawest, most human form. Key idea. Breaking generational trauma means choosing truth over tradition, even when it costs you belonging. Favorite quote, "I swore she'd never learn silence from me." The cycle ends here. Key takeaway, healing isn't just personal, it's political. Every time a woman refuses to stay quiet, she's breaking centuries of conditioning. Virginia's reckoning isn't revenge, it's resistance. The kind that doesn't need permission, only courage. The war for truth, sisters in survival. They say truth sets you free, but no one tells you what it costs first. Truth isn't some soft beam of light. It's a wrecking ball. It smashes reputations, illusions, entire institutions that have been built on silence. And Virginia's story doesn't end with her healing quietly somewhere in the background. It evolves into something louder, riskier, a war for truth itself. Because when the world refuses to protect you, you learn to protect each other. This is the stage of her life where the private story of a trafficked girl becomes a public revolution. What started as one survivor speaking against the men who treated her as disposable became a chorus. Women who were once just names in sealed documents, photos in evidence files, began to stand beside her, not because it was easy, but because she made it possible. That's the dangerous thing about telling the truth. It's contagious, but let's not sanitize it. The moment you challenge power, power fights back. The same media that once called Virginia a victim started calling her troubled. The same billionaires who claimed ignorance started paying for lawyers who specialized in discrediting women. There's always a PR firm waiting to polish a predator's image, and the world, as predictable as ever, started asking the wrong questions. Not, why did they do this? But, why didn't she speak sooner? It's the same reflex you see every day in America. Blame the survivor, protect the system. A CEO gets caught in a scandal. It's complicated. A woman accuses him. She's seeking attention. It's a pattern older than democracy itself. Powerful men weaponizing doubt while the rest of society plays accomplice. Meanwhile, Virginia's reality was more complex than any headline could handle. She wasn't chasing fame. She was chasing closure, and when closure didn't come, she settled for change. That's what this part of the book captures, the shift from victim to witness, from witness to leader, because it takes a special kind of courage to keep showing up to courtrooms filled with people who wish you disappear. And here's where it mirrors the real world again. Look around. The Me Too wave may have receded from social media, but the tide it created never stopped moving. Every few months, another name falls from grace. Another woman steps forward, and the same institutions scramble to investigate. It's exhausting how predictable the cycle has become. Outrage, denial, distraction, repeat. But the survivors aren't backing down. They've learned that collective truth has gravity. It pulls lies into the open. Virginia's alliance with other survivors shows that truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs amplification. Together, they started dismantling the mythology around the men who once owned them. The princes, politicians, professors, all those respected figures who thought their status was armor. Turns out, money can buy silence, but not forever. This is where the commentary bites. The Epstein network wasn't an accident of history. It was a mirror of our culture. A culture that teaches girls to stay quiet and rewards men for networking their way out of consequences. You see it in boardrooms, you see it in Hollywood, you see it in politics. The same psychology that let Epstein thrive is the one that keeps everyday predators untouchable. The assumption that power equals credibility. What Virginia and her sisters in survival did was rip that illusion to pieces. They made it impossible for the world to look away. And that's what truth does when it's wielded by those who are never supposed to have it. But the irony? Justice is still slow. The powerful are still protected, and yet the balance is shifting. Not because of institutions, but because of persistence. Every survivor who speaks forces a record to exist. Every testimony becomes a brick in the wall of collective memory. And collective memory, unlike the news cycle, doesn't fade easily. It's 2025 now, and you can see echoes of her fight in everything. From whistleblowers exposing human trafficking rings to states finally rewriting laws on statute limitations for assault. Progress crawls, but it doesn't stop. And that's what makes Virginia's movement more than just survival. It's a reclamation of narrative itself, the power to define what happened instead of letting history gaslight you into forgetting. If you think about it, that's the real war. Not between victims and abusers, but between memory and manipulation. Between those who want to move on and those who refuse to let the truth be buried with yesterday's news. And that's what makes her unbroken. Not because the pain vanished, but because it became purpose. She didn't just reclaim her life, she gave shape to a movement that still forces the world to look at itself in the mirror and ask, How many of us let this happen? Key idea: truth isn't liberation until it's collective. When survivors unite, silence loses its currency. Favorite quote: "We weren't just telling stories, we were reclaiming history." Key takeaway: speaking the truth is rebellion in a world built on denial. One voice can be dismissed, but a chorus can't be silenced. Not forever. Facing the monsters, the trial of power. It's funny how justice suddenly becomes fashionable the moment it's too late to matter. That's what the Glenn Maxwell trial felt like. The world pretending to care now that the king was dead, while his queen sat on the stand. A convenient performance of accountability. It was never really about uncovering the truth. It was about containing it. Virginia Giuffre's story isn't just woven through this part of the narrative, it is the pulse of it. The book captures how the survivors stood there, watching men in suits and women in pearls talk about procedure, due process, reasonable doubt, like any of that ever applied when the accused owned islands, banks, and senators. She wasn't facing one woman named Glenn, she was facing the machinery of power itself. An entire ecosystem of billionaires, politicians, and institutions that quietly benefited from her silence. This is where the real confrontation happens, not just in the courtroom, but in culture. Because what does it say about society when the only time it listens to women is after the villain dies? Epstein was the symptom. The disease is the hierarchy that kept him alive. And that hierarchy didn't die with him, it just changed its lawyer. In Nobody's Girl, Virginia paints these scenes not like a legal thriller, but like a haunting. Every testimony, another door creaking open to reveal decades of corruption we already suspected. And let's be honest, we did suspect it. We all heard the whispers. The Lolita Express wasn't a rumor. Flight logs don't lie. But the moment someone with a trust fund or title gets accused, the world collectively develops amnesia. And here's the thing, it's not just about them, it's about us. Because every time we scroll past another story about a billionaire sex offender and say, well, that's just how the world works, we become part of the cover-up too. This part of Virginia's story forces you to ask the uncomfortable question: how many times did we choose comfort over conscience? How many people laughed off the idea that the rich and powerful were untouchable? Because it was easier to believe the lie than to face how broken the system really is. It's not hyperbole to say the Maxwell trial became a litmus test for how far society has actually come since #MeToo. Spoiler, not far enough. The headlines focused more on courtroom fashion than systemic rot. The mainstream media treated the case like a soap opera when it should have been a mirror, and yet, through it all, Virginia stayed consistent. Her testimony didn't change. Her message didn't waver. While others scrambled to rebrand or distance themselves, she doubled down on the truth. Not because it was glamorous, but because she couldn't live with herself if she didn't. That's not bravery in the Hollywood sense. That's survival evolving into purpose. The haunting part? Many of the names in those court documents are still walking free. Some are making movies, giving TED Talks, or running for re-election. America's elite doesn't cancel its predators, it reinvents them. One PR crisis away from redemption, that's the privilege of power. The book captures that infuriating duality, progress and paralysis coexisting in the same breath. One survivor wins a case, another loses her job for speaking out. One headline praises courage, another mocks victim mentality. It's a cycle, a carousel powered by hypocrisy, and it forces you to confront this brutal reality. Justice isn't a system, it's a negotiation. And those with money negotiate better. In a broader sense, it's not just a courtroom battle, it's an allegory for how truth operates in an age of distraction. The Maxwell trial wasn't just about one woman's crimes, it was about the moral bankruptcy of a society that can stream true crime documentaries for entertainment, but tune out real suffering when it's inconvenient. You want to know what makes this all worse? The same world that once dismissed Virginia now profits from her story. Streaming services, podcasts, talk shows, everyone wants the soundbite of the Epstein survivor, but few want to talk about the systemic complicity that made her story possible. It's not just exploitation reborn, it's exploitation rebranded. But Virginia refuses to let that be the ending. The power of this stage of her journey is that it doesn't deliver neat closure. It exposes how closure is a myth. Healing doesn't mean forgiveness, and justice doesn't mean equality. It just means refusing to let the monsters hide anymore. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. Monsters don't always lurk in shadows. Sometimes they sit on boards, fund foundations, and smile for photo ops. The real courage isn't in slaying them, it's in refusing to be quiet when the world tells you they're untouchable. Key idea: justice isn't balance, it's confrontation. It's the act of dragging truth into places that profit from denial. Favorite quote: "They taught me that silence was survival, but speaking, that was revolution." Key takeaway: the powerful will always protect their own until truth becomes more dangerous than exposure. The moment survivors stop whispering, the system starts trembling. Nobody's girl, from victim to voice. Freedom is a funny thing. Everyone claims to want it, but when you finally grab it, you realize how expensive it really is, especially for someone like Virginia Giuffre. A woman whose entire identity had been dissected, debated, and devoured by media machines that never saw her as human, only as a headline. In this final stretch of Nobody's Girl, there's no Hollywood ending. There's no slow-motion courtroom hug or golden sunset of redemption. What you get instead is something raw, painfully human, and real. A woman trying to rebuild a life after it's been weaponized against her. And that's the truth no one likes to talk about. Healing isn't glamorous. It's not sipping green juice in Bali or posting #selfcare under an Instagram quote. It's insomnia, therapy bills, panic attacks in grocery stores, and trying to raise kids while ghosts still knock at your door. The book captures this in a way few memoirs ever dare. Virginia learning to live after the spotlight. The lawsuits fade, the cameras turn away, and she's left staring at the one thing most survivors aren't prepared for: normal life. But normal doesn't mean safe when the whole world still whispers your trauma like gossip. And here's where it gets bigger than her, because Virginia's story is now part of a global mirror. You can't talk about her without talking about how our culture consumes women's pain like entertainment. Look at the documentaries, the podcasts, the true crime TikToks dissecting Epstein's crimes like they're episodes of a prestige drama. Everyone wants to say they believe women, but the moment those women stop crying and start demanding accountability, the world gets uncomfortable again. Virginia refuses to give the world comfort. She calls out hypocrisy, she names names, she sues billionaires, and still people ask, why can't she just move on? Because moving on is a privilege reserved for those who weren't broken in the first place. When the book brings her to the point of settling up and settling down, it's not about revenge or victory. It's about peace, the kind that isn't given, but built brick by painful brick. She talks about family, love, the fragile act of letting herself be happy again. But even that happiness comes with guilt, because trauma has a way of whispering that joy is betrayal. That's what makes this ending powerful, not because it's neat, but because it's messy. She doesn't become a saint or a symbol, she becomes a person again. And that's the hardest thing for a society obsessed with victimhood to accept. We want survivors to be strong, but not angry, inspiring, but not loud, healed, but never defiant. Virginia doesn't play that game. She's angry, outspoken, and tired, and that's exactly why she's free. Now, step back and look at the bigger picture, at the system that tried to silence her. It's still there. The Epstein files may be public, but most of the names remain protected by privacy laws. Politicians who took donations from the same circles pretend they never knew. Billionaires make statements about regret while investing in the same institutions that allowed abuse to happen. America's economy might be wobbling, inflation might be choking the middle class, but money and power always find a way to protect each other. That's the through line between Wall Street and Epstein's Island. It's not just corruption, it's continuity. And that's where the confrontational truth lands. If we don't demand transparency, if we don't make it uncomfortable for the powerful, then all of this, the court cases, the exposés, the documentaries, it's just noise. Virginia's story wasn't written so we could feel better about ourselves for watching a Netflix series. It was written as a challenge. Will you remember once the trend dies? The most moving thing about Nobody's Girl is that it refuses to let pain be the final word. It turns victimhood into authorship. By the end, Virginia isn't asking for validation. She's writing her own narrative, one not built on pity, but on power. That's what makes the title sting with irony, Nobody's Girl. Because that's the whole point. She doesn't belong to anyone anymore. Not to Epstein, not to the media, not to the system that profited from her silence. She belongs only to herself. That's the revolution right there. Not a courtroom verdict, not a trending hashtag, but ownership of the self. That's what the powerful fear most, a woman who refuses to play by their script. Key idea. The real end of abuse isn't when the abuser is punished. It's when the survivor stops letting their name be defined by what was done to them. Favorite quote, I used to think freedom was leaving the past behind. Now I know it's carrying it without letting it own me. Key takeaway, liberation doesn't come from justice handed down by courts. It comes from the courage to keep speaking in a world that keeps trying to make you forget. The moment you stop being their secret, you start being your own revolution. Conclusion. You know what the biggest lie in the world is? That monsters look like monsters. They don't. They smile at charity galas, wear tailored suits, give TED Talks about leadership, and preach about empowerment. They sit at the top of pyramids built on the backs of broken girls and call it success. That's the world Nobody's Girl rips wide open. Virginia Giuffre's story isn't just about one predator or one island, it's a map of power itself. From a childhood of silence to a web of billionaires who believed money could erase morality, this book exposes a system designed to feed on the vulnerable while protecting the powerful. But here's the uncomfortable part. We helped build that system. Every time we chose comfort over confrontation, gossip over justice, we helped the monster grow. Because evil doesn't just survive in darkness, it thrives in our indifference. And that's the beauty of Virginia's journey. She didn't just survive, she made survival political. Every page of her story is a rebellion against the idea that some lives matter less because they're inconvenient to the rich. It's a slap in the face to anyone who ever said, she asked for it, or she should have just said no. No, she was a child trapped in an adult world that confused power with permission. And let's be honest, if you think this story ended when Epstein died, you're not paying attention. The same mechanisms of control are still operating right now. The same names on donation rosters. The same politicians pretending not to know. The same tech billionaires buying silence with philanthropy. But here's the real twist. Virginia didn't wait for justice. She became it. She turned her own name, once a synonym for scandal, into a synonym for truth. That's power, real power, not the kind bought in courtrooms or whispered in corridors, but the kind that comes from refusing to stay silent when silence is easier. And that's why her story matters now more than ever. Because in a world that worships money and mocks vulnerability, her defiance is revolutionary. She proved that a girl from nothing can stare down billionaires and win. She showed us that justice doesn't start in courtrooms. It starts the moment someone decides to tell the truth, even when it costs them everything. Look around. The world's economy is shaky, corruption is casual, and truth is trending for 15 minutes before getting buried by distraction. We live in a culture that rewards noise and punishes honesty. But this book, this story, it reminds you that integrity still has weight, even when the world treats it like a liability. Virginia's journey is proof that your past doesn't disqualify you. It defines your fight. She turned pain into purpose, humiliation into humanity, and silence into something louder than any billionaire's lawyer could ever silence: truth. So here's the message. If you're watching this, stop treating survival stories like entertainment. Start treating them like instruction manuals. Read Nobody's Girl. Let it wreck your comfort zone. Let it make you question who benefits from your silence, and then do something about it. Because at the end of the day, the monsters don't disappear. They just change their PR team. What really changes the world isn't exposure, it's endurance. The courage to keep showing up, even when nobody claps for you. And Virginia did that. She didn't just survive her story, she rewrote it. So go read the book, support her. Let her voice echo in places where silence still reigns. Because if we want a different ending, we need to stop waiting for heroes and start becoming them.